Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Show. We've had a lot of requests to talk around scaling a business, scaling a team. And so we have reached out today to our expert panel and included the wonderful Howard Moore, who is an expert in this field, understanding how to scale businesses from operational, strategic and cultural standpoint. And we've invited him along to join the panel with Tom and David. So we're going to go into scaling, understanding cultures, understanding objective setting, and explore that around here. But Tom, Howard, sorry, before we kick off, would you just give on a brief background on you, set some scenes, and then we'll dive in.
Of course. Thanks, Nick, and thanks very much for having me on. It's great to be here. As Nick said, I'm Howard, COO. Done scaling within the banking industry for a number of years, and then also within the tech industry. So keen to bring some of my experience and some of the things I've learned along the way to this forum. Hopefully, bring some knowledge. We'll see how.
Perfect. So let's start around culture. And everyone has a different sort of view on culture. What does culture mean to you? How do you go about sort of setting a culture?
My favorite learning about culture is that if you don't have a clear and defined culture for your company, then the people that you hire will bring their culture from companies that they have left along the way. They will bring that experience. And you're therefore going to have to spend time bringing them around to the way that you want your company to run and the way that decisions are made. And that's time that you could use to be doing more important parts of the scaling process. Your time, and time is finite. If you're spending time bringing people around to the way that you want them to make decisions and the values of your company, then that's time spent that could be used elsewhere. So a culture is something that defines the company, that helps it make decisions, and helps for it to achieve its mission and its vision. And that's defined by working out what the values are and then going through that process.
Perfect. And have you, from your experience, what bit of that sort of process gets neglected more?
I think it's difficult when you're scaling a company, let's be honest. And whether you're scaling from 15 to 50 or 100 to 300 or 1,000 to 3,000 people, scaling is a difficult process because you're going through a process of delegating responsibility and delegating authority to other people, particularly if you start off in 20 people and you want to go to 50. You're moving from a situation where you're the problem solver, you're doing it. I mean, you talk to any founder, they will talk about the multiple hats they need to wear and how busy they are and those sorts of things. You're moving personally from that problem solver, that doer, to a coach and an enabler. And you need to be able to bring people on board that are sharing your values and understand the mission of the company and what you want to achieve. And taking a step back and working that out and going through with your co-founders or with the other executives that you're working with and clearly defining that at the right stage is something that is rarely done correctly.
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, David, you must see quite a bit of that in your world.
Yeah, a lot. I'm just thinking back to a couple of clients in the last couple of weeks, and it probably is how it's saying. You get to these inflection points where you go from a nice, more intimate feel business to then as it's growing and getting bigger, people then tend to hire sort of in between those people. So you sort of have your 20 people, and then you need to hire a manager for 5 of them. Instead of looking from within, most companies then go outside of that, and then you bring someone in to manage them, and you sort of get these disconnects sometimes in businesses. It's not necessarily wrong to hire outside, but when everyone's so busy and you're like, right, I'm hiring this sales manager in because we need to manage everyone better, that person comes in, culture's way down the list of things they get immersed in. It's kind of look, just, pick up a gun and start firing kind of attitude because everything needs to get done yesterday. And then sort of 6-12 months later, everyone's like, oh, this feels very different company. And then people start leaving, and the people who were there from the beginning feel disconnected because they used to sit next to the CRO. The guy's now CRO, and now they don't. And all those little things come out of it because it's just not a process that's particularly well handled, because people think there's far more important things to do at that moment in time when they should have been doing it.
Yeah. And Tom, obviously, with the amount of turnaround you do, does culture play an important part in that, or like can you impact culture quickly?
Yeah, totally. It's entirely down to your own behaviour. As a CEO, you can change your behaviour now, and you can get results immediately. I think when people talk about culture, they're always talking about the third party, but this is literally what I do, and I really focus on my own behaviour and setting that example. I think. That said, I mean, organisations do tend to attract people in the wrong jobs, and so very often I find that rather than fire people, I actually move people into the right jobs, and also enable them to let go. And a lack of willingness to share information like financial information and the rest of it with the senior management team, I think, are all sort of warning signs. So there's some sort of threshold capabilities in there which I flush out and resolve, because you do need to resolve those in order to create a functional company. But I think the other thing, and Howard just touched on this, is the CEO should be looking 6 months ahead. So in a fast growth business, I was a vice president of the 56th largest company on NASDAQ, or fastest growing company on NASDAQ, and it was growing about 300% year on year. And you have to look 6 months ahead, because your capability gets uprooted, and you need to plan to replace things that are not going to make that, because you find misalignments. And I think the grim reality, if you look at, if you just think about, Monzo, for example, these people are sort of very often sort of product development people who, do a lot of good, in some cases, product development, but when it, they then sort of are really only interested in product development. And the guy from Monzo just recently left because there really wasn't a vacancy for that type of skill. So, and it's actually definitely not the skill of a CEO. So I think that's the reality. I think there's a couple of other things about it, which is it's quite easy for it to all about us as individuals rather than us as a team. So I think culture is, I'd like to try and break it down into a few different areas to try and make sense of it. But I think definitely we were going to talk about KPIs. I think KPIs at a top level tend to, if you're not careful, create myopic views rather than the developing the multiplier. And I certainly, my role as a CEO, I'm always that person who's planning ahead, who's planning the big plan, and then delegating those objectives to the team and letting them then fill in those blanks. And then I then develop the culture in reviews, primarily by encouraging the right behaviours, without even being prescriptive, because I'm passionate about people being themselves, Nick, as you well know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Howard, I mean, I can relate to this. What Tom says, there's lots of ideas I have at a macro level, but actually the execution is everything. And I guess a big part of your job is sort of translating my crazy thoughts, or whoever it might be, founders' thoughts, and actually into something that is real and actually can be sort of implemented.
Absolutely. I think, you need to look at it in creating a culture and then looking at the practicalities of what that means. And I like to look at it in terms of, you need to set out what your mission is. And your mission is an achievable objective that everybody in the company can buy into and feels a part of. Then you need to have a vision. And your vision is a more ethereal type concept. There's a band whose music's not for everyone, but they're called Bring Me the Horizon. And I love that concept. That's a great sort of way to, what is that thing that we want to be? And, I was thinking about it, and, some companies, they want to be the name that you use for an action. Let me Google that. It is a great example of that. And that's not a measurable objective, but it's a vision. Let's be that people. Let's be those people. And then you need to go through and work out, what are the values? And values, it's really important when you are going through your values, that they're clearly defined and that they're aspirational and not absolute. I mean, we've all been into companies and the values are everywhere around the building and they're absolutes. You know, we are this. I saw one company and it was, we are good people. Really? You're good people, okay. I mean, it's nonsensical and you say it back and it's like, well, you sort of know what they're trying to achieve, but it's not an aspirational. And it's really important that values are aspirational, particularly for leaders, because you need to create that positive movement towards the idea. And if you're being judged on an absolute, if you say, I'm a good person and all my decisions are made by being a good person, then there's going to be an employee that has a different view to you. And you have to be able to walk the walk of what your values are. You have to reflect them and they have to reflect you. And if they don't agree with your decisions based on one of those values, then their trust is going to be eroded in you. You're not making the decisions based on the values. Why do I need to? And then your culture slips away like, you know, sand through an open hand, because there's nothing you can do to turn that around if it's an absolute. If you aspire, you know, rather than we are good people, we aspire to make decisions with a social conscience. It creates movement. It says, okay, we might not be there every time, but we're working towards that. And that helps to bring the team along with you, with the values, and helps them buy in and helps them, particularly with a hiring process, to say, this is what we're looking for in people. This is what we're aspiring to be. Do you agree with that? And then you get more into the practical side of things, which is, you know, what are your addressable opportunities? What is your strategy? What are your priorities? And what are your measurable objectives? But defining the first three of those then helps you to hire for the next four parts of that. And that's really important. That's why, you know, you hear a lot of people saying, well, I like working for the company. Well, I agree. I like my workmates. I want to be working here. It's getting that right and helping people to understand what they need to do and particularly what they need to hire for. And then things flow from there. And when you're scaling, and particularly when you're trying to scale internationally, you have to have people that reflect, that want to achieve the mission, that understand the vision, and then reflect those values, because you're not going to be there every day. And you don't want to have to spend time bringing those people around to your way of thinking. You haven't got time. That's why you're bringing in people to do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I especially think setting out those values in a interview sort of process and giving an idea of the direction of travel, right? You know, this is what we're aspiring to be. Are you up for that? I think it just sets a really nice framework for entering a business like that, right? You know, people actually know what they're getting into straight away. David, have you got any other sort of tips or insights around that sort of values piece?
Yeah, it's just sort of building on what Howard said. Really, I was just nodding away to all of it. I think the key thing, particularly as you're scaling, is to find the cultural architects. Find the people who are, you know, some might say have drunk the Kool-Aid or whatever you want to say. Yeah, find the people who are. And the best way to do this is, well, a way that I do this with clients is go, if you had a new employee starting tomorrow, who would you want them to sit next to really get what you're trying to do? And they can name that person off the top of their head. It could be completely different departments where they're in. It's like, why that person? And they'll rattle it off in 2 minutes. And that's really clear to then go, right, now we're getting some clarity on why you want them to be around that person and what, you know, what that energy is that you want to get from them. That then makes it a lot easier to then articulate that. But also then, as I was saying, when you're not in the room, there'll become a point where you just won't be in the same room, where you won't have time to be with everybody. And therefore, who are those people who are going to really kind of build the culture? Who are the people who sort of will take people under their wing and go, this is kind of how we do it here? And it's really key to kind of really develop those people and have that kind of clearly articulated through.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. And how coming to the more operational piece side of the business here, we've touched on OKRs, KPIs, whatever you want to call them. What's your view there? How do you go about actually executing on sort of a strategy and a mission?
I think that becomes the most interesting part, particularly from my perspective, because once you've got that framework of the culture and what you're hiring for in place, then you can start looking at what is your addressable opportunity. And then from the addressable opportunity, you work out, okay, what is the strategy to get there? What are our priorities? And then you can work down onto the measurable objectives. And, you know, Tom was saying earlier that you can become quite myopic with KPIs and OKRs. And I completely agree with that. And I've seen them work very badly when they're not properly done. But if you frame your addressable opportunity in relation to your mission, and then your strategy in relation to your addressable opportunity, and your priorities in relation to your strategy, and work it down, and then your objectives, then you can start to practically look at what the next steps are going to be. And then when you get down to OKRs, you look at the measurable objectives, you can look at the OKRs for a team, and then you can break that down. And what people want to be able to do is understand what it is they're supposed to do. How am I going to help the company achieve this mission? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for me today, tomorrow, next week, end of this month, end of the quarter, etc., etc. And if you can cascade it down and up, back along these lines, then you're going to be able to identify all of the areas that you firstly need to hire in. So you avoid the situation that David was talking about slotting people in and not necessarily getting it correct because you're just trying to solve a problem. You can bring people in as you work out when the inflection points are. We're here, this is the addressable opportunity. We think we're going to get to this part of that addressable opportunity in this time based on the strategy we've got. These are the priorities we're working on. These are the objectives. Are we getting there? Does person A that we've brought in, what is their workload? Are they going to be able to do that? When does that workload become somebody else's workload? When do we need to bring in help? How much work? How much time have they got? Is it still in line? And it's a time-consuming process. It's fascinating, and you know, if you're bringing in the right people because of the culture, then they're helping you to achieve what you need to achieve as well. And you get to that point, which I think, you know, we've all mentioned, is making it not the company, making it part of, you know, my company for everybody, and making that, you know, the we and the me work together.
Yeah, and I guess a feedback loop is so important in that, as you said, it's not just a downwards piece, right? You're not just constantly pushing things down. It's something that should be able to flow up and down the process chain. Tom, obviously, you know, I'm sure a lot of this resonates with you, what you do day in, day out. How do you encourage that sort of feedback loop? You know, is it important at every level, or, you know, what's your views on that?
Yeah. I think it's time to talk day to day, Nick. Right, and the challenge is, what are we not talking about? That's the challenge, and that's a difficult thing to pick up. That said, I think just picking up some of the previous points, I think there's two sides of the KPIs. There's the day job and there's development. And the day job is keeping the wheels on and managing the process. And you must have a process, and most startups don't have a process. And even in fairly mature startups I've led, big startups, you know, turning over 250 million quid, for example, and growing very rapidly, they don't have a process. And that creates a lot of problems, because if you have a problem, you don't know what part of the process failed, and that's the day job. The second part, which is the CEO's job, which is something I tend to drive and own myself in conjunction with the team, is how do you get to 25% improvement rather than just the 5% in the day job. And so I'm looking at those big items and then encouraging and showing the team, which is beyond their current scope, by getting them to work together to deliver that 25%, and that without actually sort of killing everybody in the process, having some, which is definitely not what good looks like. I think in terms of mission, I think the terminology is important to get right. My view of mission is the reason for existence of a business. You know, for example, I've started a cycling business recently, and the reason for existence has got very little to do with cycling, but there's various other things that it's doing in terms of relationships, in terms of profit, in terms of well-being, etc. So the vision then is the strategy. So what are the actions that we're going to do to make these things happen? And I think within that as well, when things get difficult, you need a team, come back to your point in terms of feedback, who actually feel comfortable, Nick, to tell you or me or any one of us on this call things we don't want to hear. And you and us have to be comfortable and loving enough to receive that information in a way that actually encourages them to, and the rest of the team, to do that without thinking about it, Nick, with no fear. So how do you do that? And I think, again, Howard talked a little about values. I think there's I sort of agree to a degree with values, but they created what I describe as a tyranny of tolerance. So you talked about everybody being a good person. What if somebody isn't a good person or isn't a good company? Are you going to talk up against that? It's very difficult to. It's something that reduces that feedback that you referred to. And I think the other part of this is then working together. So, in terms of you said about at all levels, totally. I put together structures which effectively defines the vehicle, and so people are speaking at all levels, Nick. And so this information is free flowing, and anybody can stop me on the shop floor, and they do. They say, "Look, Tom, this isn't working," and then I'll go. I won't fix it myself. I'll go and grab the right person just to make sure that everybody's feeling supported. And I think it's just about mobilising people. But a lot of this actually has got to do with not just anything I've just talked about. It's about acknowledging people for who they are, Nick, right? And taking interest in different views. And I heard something as a chief economist of a big bank speaking yesterday, and it really resonated with me. He said when he was 14, the way his father taught him to take a different perspective was to read four different newspapers a day from different perspectives, and he had to read it. And he just had to. So if it's left wing and right wing, what are we not reading, Nick? Because we've got to develop the skills to receive information without our biases and the rest of it, because the grim reality of everything we've just said is that right now people are very fearful, and when people are fearful, they revert back to their previous behaviours and biases and all that stuff, and that actually is the crux of this whole thing, in my experience. So I sort of operate across a number of different levels. So that's a slightly long-winded answer to your more articulate question, Nick.
No. I don't think Nick and articulate are words that go together too well, frankly. So don't worry about that. Howard, any sort of closing points from you which you think are useful for anyone looking at scaling? Or I have to agree. I think every business I've seen 1 to 5 easy peasy, 5 to 10 nice, 10 to 20 hard, 20 to 50 struggle, actually 50 to 100 easier. When you've actually got some genuine scale, and because you've gone through the pain of probably building those processes between the 20 to 50. But any other tips or things you've seen which people should keep an eye on right now, as a closing sort of statement?
Really, I just wanted to agree with Tom's point about transparency, and it's almost about being vulnerable, or allowing your vulnerabilities to come out as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the point of scaling is to bring more people into your company and to bring their expertise. And you have to be transparent with what you think the problems are and what is working and what isn't working. And they have to feel comfortable to do the same. You're bringing in expertise, you're bringing in different ways of looking at things. You've got to be open to listen to that. And I think that's tough, because if you own the idea and it's your baby, as it were, then hearing that maybe a decision you made isn't in best interest of that baby, or whatever it may be, is not easy. But you've got to be open and vulnerable to it, and listen and try and learn. It's about, I hate the word, but it's a journey, isn't it? And you've got to be prepared to learn on that journey.
Yeah. Just one quick, if I can just jump at one point, Nick, on this, which is a secret weapon that I'll just give away, is the key to this, I think, is to act stupid, right? It sounds very counterintuitive, but if the boss acts stupid without being flippant, then everybody raises their game. Watch it happen. Try it, Nick. It works a treat.
Okay, I don't think you have to try very hard.
Smart bosses are deadly.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think Howard, that point there raised something sort of close to me. Is there are lots of leaders out there who are bottlenecks because they have all these people reporting into them, and so they're usually the voice of those people. When things come to loggerheads, they're usually sort of defending finance, or defending marketing, or defending sales, whatever it be, and that's I think that's a tough spot for a leader if you're constantly in a defensive role, right? And I think understanding how creating environments where you acknowledge the fact that if you're defending people all the time, what's probably happened is the conversation between these parties has already broken down, right? They should be having interactions themselves. But I think the amount of leaders in that scaling gap who are still basically a communication channel between two different teams is crazy, right? But I see it everywhere, you know, and it's only going to lead to negative relationships. If you're constantly defending stuff all the time, you know, you're that person. But guys, today, Howard, thank you so much for coming on board. I think there's so much on this topic we can do. Obviously, trying to keep it to our half an hour slot, which we're terrible at doing. But thank you so much for getting involved and giving insight. We'd love to have you back on again. So I think you know, you've touched on a few things that are hours and hours and hours of content we need to actually go and explore on that. Thank you so much to David. Thank you so much to Tom. Thank you to all at home. We're nearly at 7,000 viewers, subscriptions, whatever it's called, Spotify's. Thank you so much for supporting us through all these times. Hope you find this useful. And we will see you all soon. All the best. Goodbye.